Good evening. Wanted to welcome everyone here this evening. If you're visiting with us, I'm glad that you were able to come this evening. I'm sorry that you aren't going to get to hear our normal preacher. He's wonderful, but I'm going to try to stand in and fill in for him tonight, and I may not be so wonderful. So I apologize if that's the case. Before I get started with my lesson this evening, I haven't got to talk to you all about becoming an elder, and I just wanted to let everyone know how honored I am and how much I appreciate you all putting your confidence and your trust in me to shepherd this flock. I've had a couple elders meetings with Lee and Eric, and they're good men, and I really look forward to working with them. And I really look forward to working with you all as well. Since we've moved to Tennessee, you all have become our family, and we just love you all so much. And I wanted to let you know I'm new to being an elder. I've never been an elder before. So if there's ever any issues or questions or anything, I would appreciate it if you come to me and talk to me. I'm easy to talk to. I think you all know that. But I'm kind of learning, so bear with me. But I hope that God will bless me and Lee and Eric with many years of service to this congregation. And I just wanted to tell you all that and say thank you for putting your confidence and your trust in me. So now we'll get into my lesson this evening. When I was in my 20s, I had a friend that I worked with, and we got to be closer and closer friends to where he was just about almost like a brother. We did just about everything together. But he was actually from Ohio, and he lived about an hour away from Lake Erie. So he would all the time tell me about Lake Erie and the walleye, and the best walleye fishing in the world is in Lake Erie. Well, I'd never even seen a walleye, but I loved the fish, and I thought, well, I'd like to catch one of them walleye. Well, he ended up marrying a girl, and her dad and mom owned a house right on Lake Erie. So through the years, we would go up there, and he bought a boat. And in our 20s, we didn't have a lot of money. So this boat was like a 16-foot fiberglass boat, and I think it was probably about 35, 40 years old when he bought it. And Lake Erie, they call it the Great Lake. It's one of the Great Lakes, and that boat wasn't necessarily that seaworthy of a vessel, but we would go out on that lake and fish. But we got into several adventures out there, and there's probably several times that we were really close to maybe not even making it back. And but anyway, I learned several lessons while I was out in that boat on Lake Erie with him. And through the years, we would take that boat to places close to us as well. And so that's what the title of my lesson is this evening, The Lessons That I Learned in a Boat. And hopefully we can take some of these lessons and apply them to our spiritual lives this evening. The first lesson I learned was from Indiana to Lake Erie, where we'd always go to fish. It was about 5.5 hours. So it was a long haul up there. And usually we could stay the night at his in-laws' house. So we would do that. But this one time in particular, we drove all the way up there on Friday evening. We got there late. We got up the next morning, and it was dark out. I mean, really dark. But we had driven all that way, and he said, well, we'll just go out and we'll see what happens. Well, when we started out, I mean, it was almost like dark outside, and it was like 9 a.m. And the sky was kind of green, and there were just all kinds of boats coming in off the water. They're all coming at us, and we're going out. And everybody would say, y'all aren't going out, are you? Yep, we just waved, and we kept right on going. He went like, I think we were like 2 or 3 miles out. We weren't anywhere near shore. Well, that storm started kicking up, and I've never owned a boat. I don't know the first thing about boats, and I've never been on a boat in the ocean or anything, but that lake got to be like the ocean to me. I mean, we got waves. He said they were like 10 to 12 foot waves. We had a charter boat beside us, and we'd go up on top of that wave, and you could see down in that charter boat, see the people down in there fish. I'd never been anything like that in my life. It was really scary. And I got thinking, I can understand how the apostles felt that night. So let's take a look at that story in Luke chapter 8, verses 22 and 25 through 25. One day Jesus said to his disciples, let's go over to the other side of the lake. So they got into a boat and set out. As they sailed, he fell asleep. A squall came down on the lake so that the boat was being swamped, and they were in great danger. The disciples went and woke him, saying, Master, Master, we're going to drown. He got up and rebuked the wind and the raging waters. The storm subsided and all was calm. Where is your faith? He asked his disciples. That day when we was out on that storm, boy, I wish Jesus was there to calm that. When we got back, it ended up, my buddy found out, I was glad we made it back, but he found out he had a crack all the way across the hull of that boat, and it could have broke right in two out there on that. Luckily it didn't, but he took a sawzall and cut that boat all up. But one thing we can take away from this lesson is no matter what storms come our way, no matter what trials or tribulations, no matter what troubles, Jesus can protect us and pull us through them, just like he did the apostles that night. Jesus is there, and he can work us through any storms life brings our way. Let's take a look at John 16, verse 33. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. So Jesus tells us in this life we are going to have trouble, but we can take peace because he's overcome the world. He conquered death. So there's nothing that can come our way that he can't help us through. If we look at 2 Corinthians chapter 1, there's another verse that is helpful. Verses 3 through 5. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. For just as we share abundantly in the suffering of Christ, so also our comfort abounds through Christ. So we see here that Christ comforts us in our troubles. He's always there to help us through any troubles or storms that may come our way. And if Christ has the ability to calm a raging sea and quiet a thunderous storm, then we can be assured that if he tells us he will grant us peace and comfort in times when we need it, we can know that he will do this. Another lesson that I learned from that day when we were out in that storm was sometimes you need to listen to the advice of others. All those people coming in, they knew we were crazy for going out there, but we wanted to catch some fish, and we did actually catch some fish out there in them big waves, but it wasn't worth the risk. Proverbs 12 and verse 15 tells us that a wise man listens to advice. In our Christian lives, sometimes we may really want to do something, but if others around us are giving advice that might not be best for us spiritually, and especially if it's an older member, there's probably a good chance that we ought to be listening to that advice. So that's another lesson I learned out in that storm was when you're getting some advice, maybe try listening to it from time to time. The next lesson I learned was it was a different time on Lake Erie, and we had good weather that day, and we were catching fish. We'd catch some fish, and then they'd kind of die off, and then we'd start catching them again. So we were out there for quite a while. And my buddy's boat, it did have a bilge pump to drain the water, but he had forgot to turn that on that whole time. And we were out there, I don't know how, I'm guessing 10 hours. And so we was done fishing. We went to take off to leave, and he gave that gas. And when he did, all that water moved to the back of that boat. And that boat, the back of the boat just dropped. And that water, I mean, it was right there to where it almost come rushing in that boat. And he hollered at me and he said, "Get up here and drive this boat." And that's when I knew we were in trouble, because we've been on the water, I don't know how many times. He'd never let me drive that boat ever. He said, "You just keep going straight and keep it on plane and don't stop and don't give it more gas." And we had ate some Pringles while we was out there on that water, and he got in the back of the boat with that Pringles can and start bailing water. But luckily we made it back that time too. But come to find out, he had a little hole in the boat too. And so we were letting a little bit of water in that whole time too. And that's the lesson we can learn. You can spiritually have a boat that's 99% functional and 99% solid, and have one little hole, and that can bring you down. Let's look at 1 John 1, verses 8 through 10. If we claim to be without sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just and will forgive us our sins and purify us from all unrighteousness. If we claim we have not sinned, we make him out to be a liar, and his word is not in us. So we all have little holes in our boats. It's what are we going to do about having those little holes in our boat? Are we just going to let them sit there and the pressure all around that boat push water into your boat to where you get a leak so bad your boat sinks? Or are we going to try and fix the hole when they come our way? Like I said, we all have these holes in our boat, but hopefully those of us that are here tonight, we just have little problems. Hopefully none of us have a major gash in the hull of our boat like the Titanic had or anything. I'm sure most all of us just have little things that we need to work on. Maybe we could do better on our attendance, or just little things that we need to work on. Hopefully none of us have any major issues, but we should do our best to try and work on these things, because we don't want our boat to sink. We don't want to fall away from Christ. Let's take a look at Matthew chapter 14. There's an example of sinking there in Matthew chapter 14. Verses starting in verse 25 there. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it is you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." So we see here, Peter had a little bit of a hole in his boat too. It tells us in verse 30 that when he saw the wind, he was afraid. And then he began to doubt. And that's when he began to sink. This is a perfect example of what can happen to us in our life. If we begin to doubt and begin to become afraid and not trust in God, we can start to develop a hole and begin to sink as well. The next example I have is one time we were just fishing at a local lake in my friend's boat, and it was a little bit cloudy when we got there, but it wasn't that bad. But when we unloaded the boat and got out on the water, he couldn't hardly get his boat to start. But then he finally got it going. So, of course, instead staying close to the dock there, we went out in the middle of the lake to fish. And we fished for a little while, and then the clouds started getting darker, and it probably cooled off 20 degrees or so. And he said, well, maybe we ought to go back. And I said, yeah, let's do that. Of course, that boat wouldn't start. He tried and tried to get that boat to start, and it would not start. And we were in the middle of the lake. He didn't even have a paddle, so we were just stuck. But with that storm, the wind started picking up. And of course, they didn't blow us toward where we had left the truck. They blew us clear to the other side of the lake, and it started raining. And it was a warm summer day, but I just about froze to death. I don't know that I've ever been that cold in my entire life. We finally got it blew us to the shore, and we went in the restroom and stood under the hand dryer to try to warm up because we were so cold. But this can happen to us in our lives as well. If we stop following God and take our eye off of him for just a minute, we can start to drift. We want to be firmly anchored. I think it was in Ben's class we talked about anchors and what the purpose of anchors are. An anchor is what holds the boat in place and keeps it secure and grounded. And that's the way the word should be for us in our Christian lives. The word keeps us anchored and keeps us grounded. Let's take a look at Hebrews 2, verse 1. We must pay the most careful attention, therefore, to what we have heard, so that we do not drift away. So we see here that we want to pay attention to the things we have heard in the Word to avoid drifting away. Also, let's look at, while we're in Hebrews, look at Hebrews 6, verse 19. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. It enters the inner sanctuary behind the curtain. So we see here that Christ is our anchor of hope. Christ keeps us held in place and firm and solid, and avoids us drifting away. The final example I have this evening is, and the lesson will be yours after this example. One time we were up on Lake Erie, and I don't know why my buddy didn't have his boat that time, but his father-in-law had this little dinghy boat, like a rubber boat that has round sides with air. So my buddy wanted to take that out. We didn't go way out on the lake or anything, but we went just out past where the break wall is there. And there were these fellows fishing on that break wall. And one of them, he lost his balance or something when he was trying to get it unhooked, and he fell in there about up to his waist. And me and my buddy were kind of giggling about that. We kind of, when it happens, you kind of think it's funny. Well, about that time, one of them, I don't know what you call them, like speedboats, the long, skinny boats, come out of that. and he went to take off. And about that time, I had hooked into a fish, and we were set on the sides of that dinghy boat. And I was reeling that fish in, and I was pulling back, and about that time, the wake from that cigar boat hit our dinghy boat and lifted us up, and my line went slack. Well, I was leaned back, and I just went over backwards like a scuba diver. And this was in April. There, out in the middle of the lake, there was still ice on the water, and it was cold. And I went over backwards head first, and I come up and it just took my breath away. And I couldn't hardly get my breath, and I was telling my buddy, help me get back in the boat. And he was laughing so hard he couldn't. And he finally got me back up in the boat, and we look over at the bank, and those three guys are just rolling on the ground. And I thought, that about serves me right. That's a lesson you can learn right there. Don't laugh at others, because you may end up worse off in just a second. But let's take a look at 1 Timothy 6, verse 9. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. So we see here that we can fall into temptation, and the New International says be plunged into ruin and destruction. Some other versions use overtaken. You can be overtaken by ruin and destruction, or that you can drown by ruin and destruction. So we see here we can be overcome by sin and evil to the point in our lives where we almost can't breathe, where it's all around us and it's surrounding us, just like when I fell into that cold water and couldn't hardly breathe. But even if it may seem like you can't breathe and that you're surrounded by evil, and it may seem hopeless and it feels like you're drowning, it's not hopeless. Let's take a look at 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. So God won't allow us to be tempted beyond what we can endure. And he will also give us a way out, we see from this verse. So it's not hopeless, even though it may seem like you are surrounded by evil. God will also, he'll help us get out of this scenario if we are willing and want to get out of the scenario. We are never unsavable. Matthew 19, verse 26 tells us that with God, all things are possible. No matter what the scenario you're in, you can be saved. Anything is possible with God. Let's take a look at Hebrews 7, verse 25. Therefore, he is able to save completely those who come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them. So this verse tells us Christ is able to save us completely. He suffered and died for our sins so that we can receive salvation. No matter what our past looks like and how surrounded we are by sin and darkness. Tonight we have kind of used water as a negative example. You can, in our lives, you can have flooding, you can have hurricanes, you can be drowned by water. There are negatives associated with water. But water to a Christian is also a good thing. Let's take a look at 1 Peter 3, verses 20 through 22. To those who were disobedient long ago, when God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built, in it only a few people, 8 in all, were saved through water. And the water symbolizes baptism that now saves you also. Not the removal of dirt from the body, but the pledge of a clear conscience toward God. It saves you by the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at God's right hand with angels, authorities, and powers in submission to him. So we see here in these verses that God did use water to destroy all of the evil and wicked back in Noah's time. But he also used the same water to save Noah and his family and make a new beginning, a new start. Verse 21 shows us that water through baptism will save us also. So this evening, if you have need to be baptized, we can take care of that this evening. We have the baptismal here behind me, and we can baptize you. If you've maybe got some holes in your boat, some issues in your life that you'd like the church to pray for you about, we can take care of that as well. Or if you've completely fallen out of the boat and fallen away, we can help you with that, and Christ will welcome you back with open arms. So if you have any